I spent the whole day alone in the mansion. That wasn't unusual. In December, a lot of days were like that. I'd arrive early, do my rounds, turn on the heaters, check the open rooms, and spend hours in silence, with nothing but the record player playing softly in some distant room. That night, I was already on the first floor, near the exit, finishing up a few notes in my notebook. The lights were off in almost the entire house. I always did that. Lights on at night in a historic house draw too much attention. That's when I looked up by chance. The light on the second floor was on. Not flickering, not dim, fully on. I stood still, staring up at the top of the stairs, trying to figure out if it made any sense. The light was coming from the hallway upstairs, right in the middle, near where the closed-off rooms were. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. I thought, that was me. But that thought didn't last even 5 seconds. I clearly remembered not going upstairs after the last round. I remembered stopping at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, and deciding I didn't need to go back up because I had already checked everything earlier. I never forgot things like that. It was automatic. I stood there trying to force the memory. No image of me going up. No memory of turning that light on. Just a short, uncomfortable blank, like when you try to remember a dream and it slips away. That's when a chill ran down my spine like a warning. The house was locked, the doors were shut. I'd been alone in there the entire day. If I hadn't turned that light on, only 2 options were left. Either someone came in, or the house did it on its own. Neither one was acceptable. I went to the service kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife in the drawer. Not because I thought I'd use it, but because holding it gave me the sense that I still had a choice. That if someone was in there with me, I wouldn't be completely defenseless. The metal felt cold in my hand. I stepped onto the first stair, slowly, then the second, then the third. With every step, I expected to hear something, a movement, a creak that sounded different, anything to confirm a human presence. But the house was too quiet. Not even the usual wood creaks were happening. Halfway up the stairs, I smelled it. I stopped. It wasn't mold. It wasn't old wood. It was a dry, sharp, out-of-place smell. Cigarette smoke. My stomach tightened instantly. I don't smoke. I never have. The house didn't allow visitors to smoke. And I'd spent the entire day there without anyone coming in. The smell was clearly coming from the second floor, mixed with the faint pine scent of the Christmas decorations. That wasn't normal. I climbed the rest of the stairs with the knife raised, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. At the top, the light lit up the whole hallway. The paintings on the walls looked deeper somehow, like the shadows were wrong. I started checking the rooms, one by one. First room, empty, windows closed, nothing out of place. Second room, door locked, as always. Bathroom, untouched. I was opening the doors fast, not stepping too far in. Everything closed. Everything dark. No signs of forced entry. No windows open. No doors unlocked. Until I stopped at the last room. The smell of cigarette smoke was still in the air. The window was wide open. The curtain was blowing inward with the wind strong enough to sting my face. Snowflakes were coming in and falling to the floor. I didn't remember opening that window. I didn't even remember entering that room that day. I closed the window. The wind stopped instantly. I went back into the hallway. The light was still on. I stood still, listening. No footsteps, no doors, nothing. Then I turned off the hallway light. Darkness took over. Before leaving, I looked down the hallway one last time before heading down the stairs. All the windows were shut. No lights on. A rush of thoughts ran through my mind. Had the window already been open, and the hallway light already on before sunset? Or had something or someone come in through the window and walked through the entire house while I was inside, alone and distracted? My name is Ethan Caldwell, I'm 19, and I took the job because I needed quick cash before winter really hit. I live in a small town in rural Vermont, too small to have a movie theater, too big for everyone to know each other. In December, almost everything revolves around Christmas, so I wasn't surprised when I saw the ad looking for a temporary assistant to help with a historic property decorated for holiday visits. The house sat off the main road surrounded by tall old trees, the kind that lose their leaves early and always leave the sky wide open. It was a late 18th century colonial mansion, the kind you see in American history books, with a white exterior, columns out front, and windows so perfectly symmetrical they didn't feel real. The place wasn't a museum year-round. It only opened on certain dates, mostly in December, when groups came to see the vintage decorations. My job was simple. Open and close the house, check the heaters, clean the areas used by visitors, take care of the lights, and make sure no one went into restricted areas. I was alone most of the time, which didn't bother me. I've always liked silence. On the first day, the manager showed me the house map. It was a thick, yellowed sheet with all the rooms marked and numbered. Living rooms, hallways, bedrooms, storage spaces. Everything looked well organized. She explained that some areas weren't open to the public, but I'd have access for basic maintenance. I nodded without paying much attention. Old houses always have rules like that. The decorations had been up since late November. Simple wreaths made of dry branches and red ribbons. Fake candles in the windows. A handmade nativity scene in the main room carved from dark wood, with simple figures worn down by time. Nothing flashy, nothing modern. There was also an old record player playing soft Christmas music, like someone was afraid of disturbing the house. The first few days went by without anything unusual. I followed a clear routine. I'd get there in the morning, turn on the heaters, walk through the open rooms, check doors and windows. In the afternoon, sometimes visitors would show up. At night, I locked everything and left before it got completely dark. It was on the fourth day that I noticed something out of place. I was doing my usual rounds when I saw a door slightly open at the end of a hallway on the second floor. I didn't remember ever seeing that door open before. In fact, I didn't remember there being a door there at all. The hallway was narrow, with a long, worn-out rug. The walls had old paintings of local landscapes all lined up. The door was between two of those paintings, perfectly fitted, painted the same aged white as the rest of the house. Nothing about it stood out, except the fact that I didn't remember it. I pushed the door slowly. The room was small but neat. There was a simple bed with a red quilt, a small Christmas tree in one corner decorated with old glass ornaments, and a dresser with a smaller nativity scene on top. An electric candle was lit, casting a warm, steady glow. The air inside felt still, but not cold. Everything was clean, like someone had just finished tidying up. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to remember if that room had been mentioned on the map. I couldn't recall. I figured it was probably just my mistake. Big houses can be confusing. I closed the door and finished the rest of my rounds. Later that night, back at home, I went over the map in my head. There was no room in that exact spot on the hallway. The next day, I brought the map with me. During my rounds, I stopped in the hallway and compared the drawing with the actual space. Between the two rooms marked on the paper, there was nothing. No door, no extra space. Even so, when I looked up, the door was there again, closed. I opened it again. The room looked exactly the same. Same quilt, same tree, same decorations. No dust, no weird smell. It was just a Christmas room. I didn't feel scared. I felt a light confusion, like when you walk into a room and forget why you went there. I thought maybe it was a recent addition, something not updated on the old map. Historic houses go through small changes all the time. I decided not to make it a big deal. I closed the door and kept working. In the following days, I noticed that whenever I passed through the hallway, the door was always there, always closed, always in the same spot. One afternoon, I decided to run a simple test. I opened the door, looked around the room for a few minutes, and paid close attention to the details. The nativity scene had a small chip at the base. One of the tree ornaments was tilted, hanging more to the left. The quilt had an uneven fold near the foot of the bed. I stepped out of the room, walked to the end of the hallway, turned the corner, and counted to 20. When I came back, the door was closed. I opened it again. The room looked freshly arranged. The fold in the quilt was smooth. The tilted ornament now hung straight. The chip in the nativity wasn't visible from that angle anymore. Nothing about it was scary. Nothing jumped out. But I had a clear feeling the room didn't like being watched for too long. I closed the door gently and went on with my routine. In the days that followed, I didn't tell anyone about it. Not because I was scared, but because it didn't feel important enough. It was just a strange room in an old house full of stories. Even so, every time I walked through that hallway, I felt a slight pressure in my chest, like I was forgetting something simple, but essential, something I should remember, but didn't. And still, everything kept going as usual. The house ran smoothly. Visitors smiled. The music played softly. Christmas carried on, like it had always been there. After I found the room that didn't exist on the map, I tried to act like an adult. I kept telling myself that old houses have renovations and hidden doors. But starting that day, little details began to behave like the house had a will of its own. It started with small things. In the main room, there was a table with a guest book and a pen attached by a short chain. One morning, the pen was 3 fingers to the right of where I had left it. I had a habit of lining everything up. Later, I went back, and it was in the right spot again, like someone had moved it and then changed their mind. In the second-floor hallway, there was a painting of a snow-covered road that always hung slightly crooked, leaning a bit to the left. 2 days later, I walked by and the painting was perfectly straight. The dust mark on the wall, showing where it used to hang, also looked different. In the service kitchen, where I kept cleaning supplies, there was an old wall clock with Roman numerals. I used my phone to tell time, but I noticed the clock was always 7 minutes slow. I checked it 2-3 times, same thing the next day. When I adjusted it, it would slowly fall behind again, until it was exactly 7 minutes off. I tried to find a simple explanation. Old gears, I thought. But when I brought a small digital clock and set it next to it, the digital one started to fall behind too, until it matched the same 7-minute delay. I took the digital clock out of the room, and it went back to normal. Visitors started saying strange things, without realizing it. One afternoon, a couple from Massachusetts came into the nativity room. The woman smiled and said, "My grandmother had one just like this." That was common. But then she pointed at the edge of the display and said, "Look, it's the man who stands by the door, there's always one." I asked what she meant. She said, "The man in the dark coat. He stands right there, just watching." I looked at the nativity scene and didn't see any man. There was Joseph, Mary, the baby, the wise men, some animals, a shepherd. Nothing out of place. She kept pointing at an empty corner, like the emptiness itself was something. Another day, a group of teens from Burlington came with their school. One of them stopped at the top of the stairs and said, laughing, "I remember that door." He pointed down the second-floor hallway, toward the room that didn't appear on the map. The guide smiled, changed the subject, and quickly moved the group away. I started to notice how people moved through the house. Some shifted their bodies like they were avoiding furniture that wasn't there. Others glanced toward a corner of the ceiling, like they were waiting for a sound. It wasn't fear. It was a strange kind of familiarity. One night, before leaving, I did my final round. I passed by the nativity room, and I swear the figures were the same as always. The next morning, the shepherd was a little closer to the manger. It didn't look like someone had moved him forcefully. It looked like he had slowly walked, just enough to make me think it might be in my head. I took a photo with my phone and marked the spot on the floor with a small piece of clear tape, very discreet, right where the base of the shepherd touched. When I came back hours later, the tape was still there, but the shepherd was about a centimeter away from it. Instead of feeling scared, I felt irritated, because it was the kind of thing you couldn't complain about to anyone without sounding crazy. So I did what I do when something bothers me. I started writing it down. In a simple notebook, I wrote times and details. Front desk pen, moved and moved back. Painting, straightened itself. Clocks, 7 minutes. Nativity, figures shifting little by little. Visitor comments. None of that, on its own, proved anything. Together, it felt like the house was slowly building a pattern. There were the doors, too. Sometimes I'd be walking through the first floor thinking about the light bulb storage room, and the storage door would already be unlocked, just resting closed, even though I was sure I had locked it. Other times it was the opposite. I'd go to open a room. The key would turn, but the handle wouldn't give, like someone was holding it from the other side. I'd let go, take a breath, try again, and then it would open normally. The decorations seemed to multiply. One morning, I found a red ribbon tied to the stair railing right in the middle, where I'd never put one because it gets in the way of your hand. I took it off and left it on the table. The next day, The ribbon was back, in the same spot with the same tight knot. It was a small detail, but it kept returning like a reminder. And the room that didn't exist was still there, always with the same small tree and the same red quilt. I'd open the door, look for just a few seconds, and close it. If I stared for longer, the place seemed to tidy itself up, so I couldn't be sure of what I'd seen. By the end of the second week, I already had a list of small things. They didn't stop me from doing my job, but they left me with the feeling that I was inside a place that kept time in a different way from the rest of the world. Its own time. After 2 weeks, I couldn't get through a full day in the house without thinking about it once I was back home. I tried watching a basketball game on TV, eating cereal, scrolling my phone, but my mind kept going back to the second-floor hallway, to the nativity scene that changed little by little, to the clocks that always lost 7 minutes like it was a rule. I wasn't afraid, at least not the way people usually imagine fear. I didn't see moving shadows, didn't hear screams, didn't feel cold hands on my shoulder. It was a more annoying, more stubborn kind of fear, like a question you can't answer that keeps poking at you. I decided that if I wanted to stop thinking about it, I needed to prove to myself that nothing was happening. So I did what I always do when something starts to feel too big in my head. I tried to turn it into numbers and records. On the first morning of the third week, I started recording audio on my phone during my rounds. I spoke quietly, like it was a report. Main room, 8:12 a.m., nativity intact. Shepherd 2 fingers away from the tape. I wasn't trying to make a video for the internet or anything like that. It was just for me. I wanted to listen later and think, see, you're overreacting. I also started taking photos from the same angle every day. Of the nativity scene, the hallway, the crooked painting, the kitchen clock. I even made a folder on my phone called House. It felt a little ridiculous, but I'd rather feel ridiculous than feel like I was losing control. In the first few days, the records seemed normal. Small changes, but real. But after a certain point, the evidence started to irritate me more than help me. I took a photo of the second-floor hallway with the door to the extra room closed. The next day, I took another one from the same spot. When I compared them, the door was a few inches closer to the stairs in the second photo. That made no sense. The door was fixed. The wall was fixed. I went back to the hallway and measured with my steps, pressed my hand against the frame, looked for paint marks, any sign of remodeling. Nothing. I thought, maybe I wasn't standing in the exact same place. So I marked the floor with a tiny piece of tape hidden by the rug. The next day, I stood right there and took another photo. The door still looked out of place, like the hallway's perspective shifted slightly from day to day. The audio was worse. One afternoon, I recorded myself while opening the room that didn't exist. I described everything. Red quilt, small tree, glass ornaments, electric candle. I stepped out, closed the door, walked to the end of the hallway, and came back. I opened it again and recorded once more. When I listened to the recordings at home, my voice sounded normal. But in the first recording, very faintly, there was a second voice, almost layered on top of mine, repeating the last word of every sentence. I listened and thought it was just the sound of my own voice echoing back. An echo. But the hallway didn't have that kind of echo. And the tone of the voice was different. Slower. It sounded like someone trying to imitate the way I spoke, only getting the timing wrong. I told myself it could have been interference, the phone picking up something from another app, or maybe music from the record player leaking through the rooms. Still, I listened again and again, looking for an explanation. The more I listened, the more I felt like the second voice wasn't coming from the room. It sounded like it was coming from the audio itself, like it had been layered into the recording. That Wednesday, something simple happened that left me uncomfortable for the rest of the day. I got to the house at 8 a.m. like always. I signed the logbook at the front desk. I wrote, Ethan Caldwell, 8:03. I remember because I checked my phone right after. But at noon, when I went to grab a form at the front desk, the logbook was still open to the same page, and the time was different. It said 7:56. I thought maybe I saw it wrong. I checked the handwriting. It was mine. I checked the pen. It was the same pen as always, attached by the chain. I had no reason to go back and change something like that. And even if I had, why would I write 7:56? A time that didn't even match my usual routine. The weirdest part is I didn't feel angry or shocked in that moment. I felt embarrassed, like I had made a silly mistake and didn't want to admit it. I closed the book and went back to work, trying to act like it didn't matter. But the doubt started getting louder. It wasn't just, the house is doing things. It was, am I doing things and not remembering? I started looking at my hands more carefully, like maybe they could give me away. On Friday, I found a set of keys in the pocket of my jacket. They weren't the keys I used for the house. They were old keys, dark metal with a paper tag tied on with string. The tag read, Attic North. I don't remember taking those. I don't remember ever seeing those keys before. And still, they were with me like they'd always been mine. I spent the rest of the day feeling like I was missing a piece of time. Not like I blacked out for hours, but like I'd done small things on autopilot and then erased them from memory. I'd try to recall the walk from the storage room to the main room, and the memory would come in pieces, like scattered photos. At the end of that week, I noticed another kind of shift. Dates. I had a stack of visitor brochures at the front desk with days and times. I swear that on Monday the brochure said, Special Visits, December 17th. By Thursday I looked again and it said, December 16th. Everything else was the same. Same paper, same ink. Only the date had changed, like it had never been different. I started sleeping poorly, not because I woke up from nightmares, but because I'd lie there trying to replay the day in my head, step by step, like I was reviewing a movie. And there was always a moment I couldn't fill in, a small gap with no scene. On Sunday, I sat in my kitchen with the notebook open, listening to the recordings and looking at the photos, and I had a thought I didn't want to have. Maybe I wasn't documenting the house. Maybe the house was documenting me. And I was just 7 minutes too late to realize it. On the following Monday, I arrived at the house determined to stop feeling and start testing. If I was losing time or memory, I needed a simple way to check. And if the house was doing something, I needed to find out what it was actually doing, without depending on my mood or my exhaustion. I started with the most obvious thing, the nativity scene. The display sat in the main room on top of a heavy wooden table. I already had photos from several days, but they were turning into a maze. So I did something more direct. I took a piece of graph paper from the office, put it in my pocket, and drew the nativity like a map. A square for the base, lines for the edges, dots for the figures. It didn't need to look nice. It needed to be consistent. Then I marked the floor around the table with small pieces of clear tape, like I'd done before. Almost invisible, just enough to orient myself. I went back to the same spot, at the same angle, and compared. Within a few minutes, I noticed something I hadn't seen before because I'd been looking at each figure on its own. The nativity didn't change randomly. It changed as if it were copying the house. That day, for example, the shepherd was closer to the manger, yes, but he was also more aligned with the corner of the base that faced the entry hallway. The wise men had moved closer to the central scene, but along a diagonal that pointed toward the staircase leading to the second floor. The animals, once scattered, now seemed to form an arc that mirrored the curve of the first floor hallway. It might sound exaggerated, but when you're holding a map in your hand, the resemblance is hard to ignore. I tested it in a simple way. I took a chair and moved it a few inches to the left in the room, just a little, and left it there. It wasn't to scare anyone because there were no visitors that morning. It was to see if the nativity would react. 2 hours later, when I came back to the room, the chair was in its usual spot. I had no memory of putting it back. I stood there staring at the floor, like the floor might tell me the truth. Then I looked at the nativity. One of the sheep had changed position, shifted by roughly the same distance I'd moved the chair. The sheep was now slightly off to the side, as if it were occupying, in miniature, the new space the chair had taken for a while. I didn't feel afraid. I felt a bad urge to laugh, like when you realize you've lost at something you didn't even know was a game. I spent the rest of the day repeating small tests without drawing attention. I moved an object, recorded it, left, and came back. Sometimes the object returned to its original place and the nativity changed. Sometimes the object stayed where I left it, but the nativity changed anyway, as if it had recorded the intention, not the result. That's when I understood what had bothered me from the start. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a presence, it was a rule. The house seemed to react to being observed, like it didn't like being seen the way it was. When I tried to measure, the measurement changed. When I tried to mark something, the mark turned into something else. And at the same time, the nativity seemed to record those changes, like a summary of what the house was doing to me. I also started paying attention to the room that didn't exist on the map. I avoided staying inside it for too long, because whenever I stared for more than a moment, it would tidy itself up, and I'd lose any certainty. So I came up with a very simple method. Go in, look at 3 things, get out. Always the same 3 things. The red quilt on the bed, the crooked glass ornament on the tree, the base of the small nativity scene on the dresser. On the first entry, the quilt was smooth. The ornament was straight. The base of the nativity showed the chip. I left. On the second entry, an hour later, the quilt had a small fold in the corner. The ornament was crooked. The chip was gone, like the wood was whole. I left again. On the third, the quilt was like the first time. The ornament like the second. The chip was back, but in a different spot, like it was an imitation of the chip, not the same one. It was like the room was trying to keep the appearance of a Christmas room, and failing in the details, the same way a person tries to copy a signature and messes up the fine lines. I noticed something else. Every time I went into that room, the clocks ran late faster that day, and whenever I avoided the room, the 7 minutes seemed more stable. That gave me a clue. Maybe the room was some kind of center of the problem, or a place where the rule was stronger. That week, I also started noticing repetitions, not just in objects, but in scenes. I saw the same sequence of things happen again, with small differences, like the house was practicing. One afternoon, a volunteer guide named Marissa arrived to prepare for a visit. Her hair was tied back and she was wearing a green scarf. She greeted me and said, "Cold out, huh?" I replied, "That's Vermont." She laughed. 2 hours later, when a group arrived, I saw Marissa walking down the hallway and saying the exact same thing, with the same tone and the same laugh, like a repeated recording. I thought it was a coincidence. But at the end of the day, when she left, she said goodbye to me with the same words and the same gesture as the first time. And I answered the same way, without meaning to, because my body completed the pattern before my mind did. When I went back to the nativity room that night, I saw something new at the edge of the display. It wasn't a full character. It was just a simple shape, small, with no clear details, like a piece of wood that hadn't been painted yet. It was near the edge, outside the main group, like it didn't know where it was supposed to go. I didn't touch it. I just drew on my paper where it was. That night at home, I organized everything I had written down and wrote a conclusion. Very simple, like I was talking to someone I wanted to convince. The house reacts when I observe. It tries to correct what I mark. The nativity records the changes like a map. The room that doesn't exist is a point where the rules are stronger, and the repetition isn't an accident. It's a way to keep Christmas working, as if the right way mattered more than the truth. I finished writing that, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had done something useful. Not because I had solved the problem, but because I had found its logic. And when you find the logic of something, even if it's strange, you stop feeling completely lost. During Christmas week, the house felt quieter. Not in the sense of being empty, there were still visitors and volunteers, but in the sense of feeling more focused. The music from the record player played softer, like someone had turned the volume just slightly down. The electric candle lights in the windows looked steadier, without that fake flicker. And the 7-minute delay on the clocks stopped being just an annoying detail and became a kind of constant warning. On Christmas Eve, I arrived earlier than usual. The road leading to the mansion was covered in a light layer of snow, and the sky had that pale gray Vermont usually gets when the cold is serious. I thought about staying just a little while, do my round, check the doors and heaters, and leave before dark. That was the safer plan. But I'd already spent too much time trying to understand the house to pretend it was just another day. The first thing I noticed was a different smell in the front hall. It wasn't mold or old wood. It smelled like pine, like a real Christmas tree, even though the house's trees were small, old, and almost all artificial. I stood still for a minute, breathing slowly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the second floor. I went up without rushing. I'd already learned that running only made my head worse. The second-floor hallway looked the same as always. Worn-out carpet, aligned paintings, closed doors. But the door to the room that didn't exist was open, just a hand's width, like someone had gone in and hadn't finished closing it. I stopped before touching it. For some reason, the feeling I had wasn't go in, it was go back. Like the sensible part of my body had decided this was too much. I ignored that feeling and pushed the door. The room was decorated like always. Red quilt, small tree, electric candle, nativity scene on the dresser. But there was something else. A simple wooden easel, the kind used to hold large books, was standing against the wall. And on it was a thick open book with yellowed pages. I didn't remember seeing that easel anywhere in the house. The book looked genuinely old, like something from an archive. The cover was dark leather, the corners worn down. I walked over and looked at the open page. It was an employee log. Names, dates, roles, short notes. The handwriting was very neat, the kind of letters that look carefully drawn. I read a few names without recognizing any. They were names of people I'd never met. Most had dates from the 19th century. Then I saw a line and froze. Ethan Caldwell, assistant, December. My first reaction was to think it was a bad joke, that someone had written it to scare me, but the ink didn't look fresh. There was no shine, no sign of modern pen marks. It looked just like the rest. Old, dry, part of the page. I touched the line with my finger and felt a chill, not from the cold, but from a kind of mistake. Like I'd touched something I wasn't supposed to. I looked across the whole page, searching for another similar entry, trying to find some explanation, and saw that my name appeared more than once, not repeated like a copy, but logged across different years. Ethan Caldwell, assistant, December. Ethan Caldwell, caretaker, December. Ethan Caldwell, aide, December. The dates next to them changed, always in different decades. And I realized something even worse. In some years after my name, there was a short note, like a destination. Transferred. Dismissed. Remained. I didn't know what remained meant in a log like that. It felt more like a personal note than a work record. I closed the book slowly, like it might break. When I shut it, I saw something tied to the cover with a piece of string. An old photograph. Small, with wavy edges. I gently pulled it free and turned it over. In the photo, 4 people stood in front of the mansion, bundled in heavy coats. The image was a little blurry, but you could see the faces. 3 of them I didn't recognize. The 4th, in the corner, was me. Not looked like me. It was me. Same face shape, same hair, same tired expression, like I was trying to smile for the camera but didn't have the energy. The clothes were old, but the body was mine, and I was standing exactly where I usually stood when I waited for visitors at the entrance. I stared at it until my eyes went dry. I blinked, and the photo stayed the same. It wasn't a quick illusion. It was a record. A piece of paper saying I had already been there in a time that wasn't mine. I wanted to leave the room, but my legs didn't move right away. I looked around like the rest of the room might help me breathe. That's when I noticed the bed. The red quilt wasn't flat or folded. It was arranged in a specific way, like a bed in a kid's room. There was a smaller pillow with a simple snowflake pattern. On the wall, near the headboard, there was a decoration I'd never seen before. A thick Christmas stocking, with the name Ethan stitched in white. I didn't have a stocking with my name on it at home. I never did. My mom wasn't that kind of person. Still, when I looked at it, some part of my memory tried to fit the scene in, like it was normal. Like I had always slept in that room as a kid. I took a step back and the floor creaked. The sound was too loud, the kind of creak that makes you feel like the whole house is paying attention. I went down the stairs almost on autopilot and headed straight to the main nativity room. The record player was playing a slow Christmas song, one of those old American classics. The room was empty, no visitors. The nativity scene was there, quiet, waiting. I walked up to it and saw that the wooden figure I'd noticed days ago wasn't just a simple shape anymore. Now it was a full character. It didn't have detailed paint like the others, but its shape was clear. A man in a dark coat standing near the edge of the nativity, outside the main scene, and the face, even without much detail, was turned outward, turned toward me. It wasn't like the figure was looking with glass eyes. It was simpler and more wrong. It was posed like someone who knows there's an audience, like someone who isn't part of the nativity story but is part of the act of watching it. I didn't touch the figure. I just stood there, hands at my sides, trying to keep my mind clear. That's when the idea finally came together in my head, with no room left for excuses. The house wasn't haunted. It was repeating. It was keeping Christmas running as a fixed pattern. And when something fell out of place, it corrected it. When someone entered the pattern, it recorded them. And when it needed someone to fill a space, it didn't invent. It replaced. I thought about the entries in the book. Transferred, dismissed, remained. I understood that remained wasn't about a job. It was about place, about staying inside the house, inside the pattern, inside the Christmas that wouldn't end. I left the room, closed the front door carefully, and stood in the front hall for a few seconds, staring at the stairs leading to the second floor. I didn't feel like running. I felt a heavy certainty, like I had discovered a rule far too old to be broken by force or stubbornness. And I knew in a simple, cold way that understanding wasn't the same as being safe. I didn't sleep that night. When I got home, I took off my jacket, dropped my keys on the table, and stood still in the middle of the kitchen, listening to the silence. I expected to hear something, maybe a car passing, the heater kicking on, any sign that I had really left the house. Everything sounded normal. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. I opened the notebook where I'd been writing things down and tried to write a simple sentence. I saw an old record with my name, but when I looked at the page, the pen took a moment to touch it. My hand was shaking a little, like it didn't believe what I wanted to write. In the end, I wrote it anyway. I wrote about the book, about the photo, about the stocking with my name stitched on it, and I wrote about the man in the nativity scene looking outward. I finished writing and read it all out loud, to prove to myself it wasn't just in my head. I wanted the words to make me feel steadier. They only made me more tired. The next day, December 25th, I wasn't supposed to work. The house wasn't open. Still, I woke up early, like my body was following some internal order. I checked my phone and saw the date. Christmas. I tried to think about food, about family, about anything normal. My mind kept going back to the extra room like it was an address. I spent 2 hours pacing around the house, washing dishes that didn't need washing, straightening things that were already straight. At some point, I realized I was repeating movements like I was practicing. I stopped and leaned my back against the fridge, breathing deeply. It was the first time I really thought, what if the house had already started changing me without me noticing? I decided I needed to end it in a practical way, not solve it, because I already knew it wasn't a normal puzzle. I needed to cut the connection. So I did 3 simple things, like someone trying to finish a job and leave. First, I called the administrator and said I couldn't continue. I made up an excuse, talked about problems at home, mentioned my health. She sounded annoyed, but not much. Her reaction was strange. It felt more automatic than real conversation. She said, "I understand. We'll handle it." And that was it. Second, I deleted the photo folder on my phone. I didn't want to, because it was the only proof I had for myself. But I also understood that those records were part of the game. The house reacted to being observed. Maybe I'd been feeding the whole thing. So I pressed delete and watched the images disappear. Third, I took the notebook, put it in a box along with the old keys I'd found, and shoved everything to the back of the closet. It wasn't bravery. It was the kind of thing you do when you don't want to see something in front of you. I just wanted the world to have normal edges again. That afternoon, my mom texted me asking if I was coming over for dinner. I said yes. I went. I sat at the table with my family eating overcooked turkey, listening to my uncle talk about the weather in Burlington, and tried to act normal. For a few minutes I managed. Then my youngest cousin, who was 15, asked where I was working. I said it was at a historic house. She smiled and said, "Oh, like those haunted houses you see on TikTok?" I laughed, a short laugh, and said no. It was just an old house with Christmas decorations. She said, I love those old Christmas songs, like White Christmas. They give you a strange feeling, right? I froze with my fork in the air, because very faintly, coming from the living room, I heard that exact kind of music. And I knew my family wasn't playing any music. The TV was off. Everyone was talking. Still, the sound was there. Low, like it was coming from another house, or another memory. I got up and went to the living room, pretending I needed water. There was no music at all. I went back to the table. The sound was gone. I spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself I had imagined it. On the 26th, I woke up with my phone showing 7:07. I remember because the number annoyed me. I unlocked it and saw a notification. Alarm, 7 ming. I never set alarms for exactly 7. I always left it for a little after 8. I went into the settings, and there it was. Daily alarm for 7 ming, turned on. I turned it off. Washed my face. Came back and noticed the kitchen clock was slow. 7 minutes. I hadn't noticed before because I didn't usually look at it. I adjusted it. Later, when I checked again, it was slow again. 7 minutes. I started noticing small things inside my own house, the way I had in the mansion. A glass I'd left near the sink was a little farther to the side. A picture on the living room wall was straighter than I remembered. A red ribbon, one of the kind my mom uses on gifts, showed up tied to my bedroom doorknob. I asked her about it. She said she hadn't put it there. That night, I dreamed about the second-floor hallway. In the dream, I was walking, and the walls seemed to stretch. When I reached the door to the room that didn't exist, it was already open. Inside, there was a bed made up like someone was waiting for me. I woke up with my heart racing, but without panic. That was the worst part. The dream felt familiar, like I'd had it before. 2 days later, I got another message from the administrator. She said she'd already found a replacement for me, a 19-year-old guy from a nearby town. She sent his first name, and I stared at my phone screen without understanding why, but the name gave me a bad feeling. Not because it was scary, because it felt right, like a piece clicking into place. I tried to distance myself from everything. I avoided driving past the road that led to the mansion. I avoided talking about it. I stopped looking up historic houses. I stopped listening to Christmas music, even though I liked it. I was doing everything I could not to feed the rule. And for a while, it worked. Or it seemed to. Now I'm writing this from a place I won't specify because I'm not sure what place means when the house decides something belongs to it. I only know that sometimes when I close my eyes, I can see the nativity scene clearly. The manger in the center, the wise men moving closer, and that man in the dark coat near the edge, outside the story, looking outward like he's waiting for someone to look back. I don't know if I left the house, I don't know if the house left with me. But I know that somewhere in Vermont there's a hallway with a door that doesn't appear on any map. And that door keeps making room for Christmas like it's a basic function of the world. And I know that if you're in an old house in December, and you notice the clock is always 7 minutes slow, don't fix it. Don't mark anything. Don't try to understand too fast. Because some things, once they start recording you, don't stop just because you decided to leave.